Hey folks, we got a special guest with us today to do an Adventurers League legal character build for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Let's welcome the Lizardman Crawl.
I do believe the current term is Lizardfolk.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I got this book here. It says Lizardman. It must be like an old edition or something.
I do believe so.
My apologies. But we're going to do a character build, and you're a lizard folk from the swamp. So we should probably make like a barbarian or a ranger.
What? We can't be a wizard or a warrior poet?
I guess you could. We know we're going to do something different, and yes, of course, you could be something other than a barbarian or ranger. But your background, it's going to be Outlander, right?
What? We can't be a sage or an acolyte?
Welcome to Nerdarchy. I'm Nerdarchist Dave, for nerds by nerds, and today I'm joined by
Nerdarchist Corral.
Nerdarchy is a place for news, views, and homebrews for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, as well as other role-playing games.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and attune to that notification bell.
Down in the description below, you're going to be able to find a link to D&D Beyond, where there's a character sheet that you can follow along as we build our Lizardfolk character build that's Adventurers League legal. And while we're at it, let's thank D&D Beyond for sponsoring this video. Without them, it would not be possible. So, Crawl, I guess we kind of know where we're going for this character build as far as race.
Well, obviously.
So now we're going to need a character class, we're going to need a background, we're going to fill out some stats and abilities. So, you didn't like my ideas for Barbarian and Ranger. Although, I just felt like with the swamp and all that goodness, it just seemed appropriate.
Well, wouldn't it be great to be a lizard folk that's a warrior poet?
Oh, like maybe like a bard?
Absolutely.
Excellent choice. That's a little bit different. Sometimes here at Nerdarchy, we like to do something called unorthodox character builds, and this might fall into that category.
Absolutely. You shouldn't allow your character race to determine what classes they're going to necessarily be designed for or good at.
All right, so College of Valor Bard, that's our class. We have our race. We're going to need a background as well.
So what if this lizard folk happened to come from a bit of a history? If you're going to go with something along the lines of a Valor Bard, we already know that there's some warrior-esque qualities. What if his father or grandfather did some service and was bestowed upon a keep? And now this hereditary title has come down. So you've got this warrior poet who's a knight.
Oh, that could be really interesting. So what you're saying is like some duke or king bestowed upon the character's grandfather, lands and titles, and now, so would he have learned his knightly trade from other lizard folk, or perhaps vassals or knight retainers that are in service to this lizard folk's father?
Absolutely. You could go in, a variety of different directions. Like if we're talking about a generational proceeding of lizard folk with a noble background, you could have a lot of fun with that. If you wanted to go completely off the wall, you could have him be trained by other humans, but I think it would be more traditional to stick with the family and have this stronghold or keep on the edge of a swamp, and therefore the vassals would be other swamp dwellers, and therefore you might maybe have the retainers be maybe bullywugs.
Oh, that would be interesting, especially if this particular lizard folk was like a diplomat to the other races and species within the swamp. Maybe there's a resource that's valuable to the kingdom from there. But I was actually thinking, that probably there's some knights that probably served this lizard folk's father, and that's where he would get his formal training as a knight. His personal attendants and vassals, though, the bullywugs, I really do like that idea.
Well, there are a few bullywugs that I am familiar with.
Oh, really? Such as?
We've got Blorp and Slurp and Warble.
They sound like a fine lot indeed. All right, background's done. Character class is done. Race, obvious. So let's kind of break it down. Being a noble knight, you're going to get So you're going to get some proficiencies from that. You're going to get history. You're going to get persuasion. You're going to get a tool set, and you're going to get a language.
Well, if we're potentially throwing around the idea that bullywugs are going to be traveling with this particular lizard folk, well, wouldn't it be recommended that this lizard folk know bullywug?
That is a very good idea. Not only that, too, and I really think the idea of him being a diplomat to the swamp would be kind of cool, too. You know, he'd speak lizard folk, he would speak draconic, he would speak common, he would speak bullywug. So he'd be very, very versed in the tongues of the swamp, which is really cool. Gaming set, what are you thinking? Dice, cards?
Well, if we're talking about someone who's a bit noble, is there a more noble gaming set than chess?
That's a good point. The intellectual pursuits as well. So with that, let's take a look at your race. Actually gives you some benefits as well.
Skill-wise, the lizard folk are known to have some options. Survival in the swamp is not exactly easy. But if we're leaning towards this being, noble, maybe we should have things that fit more in line with that type of upbringing. Knights tend to be mounted. Therefore, if this person's going to be riding a horse, why not go with animal handling?
That makes a lot of sense. Now, as a lizard folk, I mean, you already know this, but the other folks following along may not know. You get 2 skills to choose from being a lizard folk, from animal handling, nature, perception, stealth, and survival.
Well, lizard folk are wiser than your average race. Therefore, I think leaning towards perception to notice what might be going on outside your general vicinity might be a wise idea.
That might be wise indeed. And you have those keen natural senses. Sure, why not? I think it all plays in very nicely. One of the great benefits about being a lizard folk are these hard to penetrate scales to ward off the blows of your enemies.
That is indeed. Therefore, you could, if you were making a warrior poet, lean heavily upon dexterity and bolster that armor class.
That's true. You're not going to get heavy armor proficiency, but you're not really going to get it. You get medium armor, but like you said, you might want to be more dex-based and more nimble and rely on your skill and scales rather than sheets of metal. So talking about stats and ability scores, let's take a look at that for our warrior poet.
Well, first and foremost, we understand that bards need to be charismatic. They need to, be able to charm and woo. Therefore, I think there should be a heavy focus on charisma.
That's an excellent choice. We could put our high stat in charisma, giving us a 15. And then the other 2 areas we might want to focus on are dex, obviously. And if you're going to be in the thick of it, you're going to want some hit points for con. Now,
so there's a line of debate there. We are lizard folk, naturally hardy. But since we have a choice as we mechanically build this character, would we like to be extremely hardy but a little less nimble? Or would we like them to kind of match? You could put your 14 in dex and be able to build that up. Put your 12 in constitution, bumping that up to a 14.
Well, that's true, because our lizard folk do get a +2 to dex and a +1 to wisdom. And some would argue, the only thing better than having a lot of hit points is not having your hit points deducted.
So that gives us, a 13 to play with. Since we get a +1 to wisdom, why not get a third 14 by putting that in wisdom?
We could, but that means you're going to have a dump stat and have something low. I do have a suggestion. We could go with an alternative and do point buy and only take an 11 to that wisdom. That'll become a 12. Then that would give us a 10 to put in strength. And, you're a lizard folk, you're hardy. You do a lot of swimming and outdoor activities. So I think you're going to be stronger than, at least as strong as average.
Well, being average in strength and intelligence and not having a dump stat would actually be a wise decision.
So with that, we're going to let's jump back into skills because, as a warrior poet, as a bard, you're going to actually get 4 skills that you're going to have expertise in, and you're going to be really good at using them.
And as a bard, you get to choose 3 that, from the entire list to be proficient in.
That is true too. So looking at our bard skills, where do you think we're going to go?
It is hardly wise to be a bard and not, be proficient in performance.
That's true, especially if you want to be a great poet and orator. It's going to be vastly helpful. Also, what is the point in being trained in history if you can't expound upon it to those amongst you?
Well, as a warrior poet, perhaps inspiring via historic knowledge and historic text might be the way that this lizard folk might aid his allies, calling out battle tactics that have been used successfully in the past. Therefore, knowledge and history would be highly recommended.
So I would say, which of course you get from being a knight. I would say for skills from your bard class, maybe we should lean on that lizard folk ancestry and maybe take athletics. Because maybe you spend a lot of time honing your skills and your body, and it'll make up for that low strength.
Well, you said it. You said it exactly. Not having a focus in strength and being more dexterous, being proficient in athletics would only make sense.
Now, I mean no offense, Crawl, but some of us less scaled folk may find you a little off-putting and mayhaps intimidating.
Well, you bring up a good point. It makes a interesting dichotomy, if you will, to be able to orate well and possibly persuade those, but when persuasion fails, perhaps invoking a little bit of fear could be useful.
You do, as a lizard folk, get an ability called Hungry Jaws.
It is true.
Just saying. Oh, wait a minute. As a bard, you're going to have to play some instruments.
That is true, and considering the claws that one does have, there's a variety of instruments that are not going to go over all that well.
I would think the lack of lips would be more of a problem, personally.
Well, there's that as well. So, I particularly favor the drum.
What about a viola or lute, perhaps?
They can work, although there are times that
No pick needed.
No pick needed, but perhaps, need to replace the strings every once in a while. But maybe that can be worked into an intimidate check.
Well, that's true. It seems a lot easier than trying to use a windwood instrument for yourself.
I do believe the term is woodwind.
Oh, you're correct. I'm being learned by the savage. We were talking about skills, and we did mention earlier that you're going to be very good at 4 of them. So what do you think would work really well for a lizard folk warrior poet?
Well, first, performance, as I brought up, should be your foremost skill. So therefore, that's highly recommended for one of your expertise. And then, as you said, being a warrior poet, one must be athletic. Therefore, expertise there makes the most sense as well.
Good point. Also, we did talk about Crawl being a bit of a history buff.
Yes, being raised inside a keep as opposed to spending more time in the swamp. Maybe there's a bit of love of books and the past.
Then why not double down on those keen lizard folk senses with perception?
That will indeed, counteract the slightly lower wisdom.
So next thing we might want to talk about and think about are some feats. Savage attacker, maybe?
Keep going to those roots. We are not making a barbarian here. What if we, look at the fact that we put an odd stat into charisma and focus first and foremost upon the feat actor?
Oh, actor is a fine feat, and you're right. It will even out that odd stat, and then from there, for your stat adjustments or feats, we can look at. I think that because this is a bit of an unorthodox build, we're going to have to go heavy into stats.
And I would put a focus primarily on charisma and dexterity for this particular build. Depending upon what type of armor you see this particular character wearing or getting access to, I think going heavy dex using a shield, you could literally be traveling around with a shield and scales and have a decent armor class without actually needing armor.
Oh, that works really well. So you're going to either want to take that dexterity to a 20 or an 18, and the other stat will be charisma, which you're going to take to a 20 or 18, depending on which way you decide to go. So what kind of weapon are you going to wield? A mighty axe.
Why bother? As a bard focusing on dexterity, this would definitely be a duelist. I would say, wielding a nice rapier and every once in a while delivering a savage bite.
That is quite the image in my mind. So you're like one of the three musketeers, a swashbuckling lizard folk warrior poet, swooping down from balconies and rescuing damsels and putting ruffians into their place.
Absolutely.
With that's all well and good. A fine choice for a character. I think it would be a lot of fun to play. But let's look at some ways that the dungeon master might use the warrior poet lizard folk noble knight in his game or her game.
Well, the scaled skald, as it might be called, could be a diplomat. Well, perhaps he or she is not as well trained as myself, so perhaps this is an NPC that the GM is asking the players guide, because perhaps negotiations have not gone as well as one would expect, and therefore they must securely travel to or from the swamp.
That is one way to use it. What about if this particular lizard folk was a rabble rouser and decided they wanted more from the kingdom than they were already offered, and through this lizard folk's charisma and ability to lead, he was able to rise the swamp up behind him and begins going on a rampage and becomes a bit of a warlord.
That could absolutely happen. The swamp is full of all kinds of shall we say, if we want to use stereotypical misnomers or what have you. You've got lizard folk, you've got bullywug, you've got grung, all kinds of humanoids that tend to lean towards that savage or evil alignments, could easily be brought together and have a war party led against cities and settlements alike.
I almost want to see this evil version of Crawl leading from the back of a dragon turtle, the giant Hoda equipped with bullywugs and lizard folk that are raining death from above. So it could make an interesting adversary for the players.
That would be quite the encounter.
But perhaps you're more interested in political intrigue and the nearby human villages and settlements are kind of feuding with the swamp or even the keep, and the players have to be brought in to kind of settle this dispute.
A mediation, if you will, could be a lot of fun. Perhaps a handful of side quests linked to both sides. Perhaps they're both making accusations about these accusations, these things that may have transpired, but the players need to investigate. Oh, perhaps the humans have claimed that the lizard folk are causing undue problems within the town. Perhaps the lizard folk are claiming that the humans are actually raiding the lizard folk supplies. Players are then tasked with investigating and figure out who's the actual culprits behind it. Maybe there's a party that is unhappy with the lizard folk having land to claim as their own and are behind all of this. And without the players investigating, it will lead to that potential war.
Those are all great alternatives. Perhaps the players have to remind the villagers why the lizard folk were granted this keep in the first place. Perhaps the lizard folk have to be reminded of their noble roots to begin with. But all of this can be compiled together into one awesome adventure, I believe. The question is, what do you guys think? Would you use Crawl, the warrior poet, in your game, either as a character to play or as an NPC? We're going to do a character build guide that you can find over on a DM's Guild. Go down to the comments, let us know what you think. While you're at it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
So you can see the link to the character over on D&D Beyond in the description below.
So until next time,
stay nerdy.